All right, without further ado, let's bring our guests to the stage. And I want to start with Peter. Peter Haas is joining us from Vancouver, British Columbia, just north of me up in Canada. Peter, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, great. I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having
And we've
me.
we've also got Jimmy Vaughan. He's out on the East Coast in New Jersey joining us. Jimmy, welcome to the show. How's it out there?
It's great, Nick. Bi-coastal, that's what we're calling it. I'm on the East Coast. You guys are on the West Coast. But again, we have capabilities to bring us all in.
And we're excited about the Europeans hopefully joining. I know it's a little bit later over there. We have customers all over the world. This is exciting. It's also exciting that you're joining each of you from your respective Microsoft team setup, right? There's nothing unique here. I'm on a Logitech Brio tied into my Microsoft Surface sitting here in my home office. Where are you guys joining us from?
I'm on my Teams client in my basement.
You look great. Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm in the office. I do a lot of shows from here. I'm in my office just with my team set up, my normal camera, my microphone. Everything is just how I join normal meetings as well. This was great and easy to use.
Well, let's jump into what brings us together. We're talking about video, and I think one of the things that we need to appreciate and understand is that historically we've thought of things in terms of video conferencing, super low latency, accessible, ubiquitous, we make it simple. And then we have the broadcast. I've had the opportunity to be on a couple of those. When makeup shows up and sees a bald guy, they're always a little paralyzed, right? A lot of expense, a lot of complexity, a lot of hoopla, setup, multiple people. And what we're really talking about, I think, today, just to frame it out for our audience, is this rich experience in the middle. The idea of training, the idea of these different experiences. And Peter, I think this is something that you've been front and center on. So maybe help us understand what brings you to today and add a little bit of context for yourself.
Sure. Well, yeah, so my journey kind of started out pretty innocent. I need to do a corporate live event for the CEO using the tools that we have. Single video, single content works really well, but then that started to, as everybody knows, escalate pretty quickly. Can I use a better camera? Can I use multiple cameras? Hey, we have a panel. I need 3 to 5 people now on screen. Can we use better audio? How about a lapel mic? Hey, and this was a good one too. Now I have a video that I want to play in here. And it's a public event. Can we also stream this to YouTube at the same time? And then the best one I had, a while ago too was, and it's all in a hotel. Right? So you're getting
Easy.
layered and layered and layered. And I guess as you start to show your capabilities in live events, things get more and more challenging. So
Well, and
yeah,
I think those challenges, that's exactly in the heart of that space we're talking about. And, it's interesting because you knew Epiphan prior to Microsoft. So maybe help understand a little bit about your background and what led you to reach out to Epiphan and look at us.
yeah. So it was that constant layering of issues that I was being dealt with in town halls and corporate events, and now being moved into hotels. And how do we do this? How do we always do this without hiring a big expensive AV company to come and do this each and every time? And I know my aha moment was seeing Epiphan at a trade AV show and seeing the Pearl 2 at that time for the first time. And this was just like a magic box for me. I could do SDI, I could do HDMI, USB video, I could do the professional audio. It even had the local record, right? Like my biggest fear working in a hotel space too was losing the hotel internet. I can't blame my corporate, network guys anymore. It's the
Yeah,
hotel
right.
internet. Yeah, and at least the show could continue, right? I'd have a recording of the event, and I would be fine. So it ticked so many boxes for me. It was a lifesaver. So I used that for years. And I know in order for me to kind of sell it to my organization, it was so simple to operate that I actually at one point volunteered to do all the roles of audio, video. I set up the switcher on my iPad and I sat in the audience. So I was an audience member to a live event and actually doing the switching and participating. So just to kind of prove that, once you have your layouts set up and I could trust the audio sources because I knew what was on screen. I knew all the audio I had. It was flawless. It was like, where have you been all my life?
I love that story, Peter, and I loved it when you shared it with me when we first met, because I do think it's the same discovery I had when I discovered Epiphan 2.5 years ago. Where have you been all my life, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
uniqueness in that kind of open architecture, that ability to plug into anything to just make it work. Jimmy, we're jumping a little bit here, but that's the fun part of these interactive and discussions. Like, let's talk about that existing infrastructure then. Let's talk about giving people like Peter the confidence that they're going to get good audio and video out of existing Microsoft infrastructure. Give a little bit of sense of who you are, what brings you to today, and yeah, how does infrastructure play into this?
Yeah, it's interesting because my role here at Microsoft is I'm a partner technical specialist, so I really enable partners in the Microsoft Teams room world side. And that most of the time is actually one of the more expensive items or rooms inside of an organization is that one room that they put the best cameras in, they put the best microphones in, they do all of this to the AV side, and then they say, like Peter said, how do I get all of this expensive equipment out to the world? What if I want to do the town hall? We've got webinar, we've got town hall, we've got all these different things inside of the Microsoft world. But Peter, like you said, there's challenges. What if I need somebody on screen to do sign language to make this more inclusive for those that have this whole world that's out there for other people that might not get that experience from that good audio and video side? How do I look at all of these things that I need to do? And where do I really do this? I just spent so much money on all this equipment, but now I've got, all right, I have some limitations. And that's really where Nick, you, myself, and Peter sort of had these discussions and saying, hey, our partners have the ability to do this. And Microsoft partners with Epiphan, and here's how we do a lot of this stuff, even here at Microsoft ourselves.
Yeah, it is really interesting to see how radically the infrastructure has been changing over the last few years. The investment, right? And that proof point. I'm a simple, stupid kind of guy, right? Like, what's a Microsoft Teams room give you? It gives you good video, good audio, sorry, great video, great audio, and great internet. What are the three things every live event producer terrified about? Good internet, great video, great audio, right? So I think there's this opportunity to turn those into these studios and service to these new types of production. I mean, Peter, is that the type of stuff you see customers keeping awake at night? And like, what are the more nuanced details of that you see?
Yeah, definitely the current asks that I'm getting are a lot like, as Jimmy said, right? I'm put all my effort into that CEO's boardroom, right? I've got the best cameras in there. How do I bring that into a live event, right? I have already the gear. Let me use it. The other one too, Jimmy mentioned as well, like our company, Microsoft, as well as many others, I see it in healthcare and the government's court systems, this drive for inclusion. Sign language is such a big ask right now. How do I get that second video and show that? And then as well comes the branding, the corporate branding, right? I think everyone, when they think of an event, they picture their company logo and their colors and
Yeah.
like we have here. I was mentioning too, one of my problems too is how do I make sure the CEO is in the middle of frame, right? Like I want him in the middle of my panel, not off to the side or anything, right? It's all about control when we're doing live events and predictability. So that's
I also think it's
yeah.
about curating that experience. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember what it was like when we used to actually get on stage. The CEO,
Yeah.
everything was staged, right? Everything was blocked, as they say in the theatrical world, right? You're making sure people are physically in specific spots. There's a dynamic to who sits where, how the questions are asked. And what's happened, if we go back to that pyramid, right, and we just pause for a second and look at it, is in video conferencing, we want a ubiquitous experience. We're all sitting around the table together, right? We all want to be able to interrupt each other. We all want to be able to talk to each other. But as soon as we start to think about moving into these different modes of work, these different types of activities, when we're trying to tell a story to a group of internal employees, a town hall, or share financials with a group of external investors, a quarterly business review. Now, Peter, that's when I need to curate the experience. I want to make sure that when Nick Milani is holding court, Nick Milani's on screen and somebody's not pinning up some random employee or looking at somebody's background or trying to figure out if that's a real wood background in Jimmy Vaughan's house or if it's a fake one. What is it, Jimmy?
Yeah, again, this is real. This is 100%. But the truth is, yeah, you said it perfectly. It's a different way of actually presenting, and storytelling is a huge part of everything that we do on video. You've got to have the right ability to actually present yourself in the right light. And video conferencing is a lot different than a town hall, or like Peter said, making sure that that CEO is in the center. And as you said, Nick, we do this all the time for in-person events. Why are we not looking at this and saying, hey, we've got to also maybe change a few little things to be able to do this for these other virtual events that we have too? I know that we're going to talk a little bit about bringing other people in live on video with us later. This is a great scenario. The idea is, I don't necessarily need everybody that's going to be in the meeting on the stage at the same time, but I can bring people in as they're needed or as they have questions. And it's not just, I posted on LinkedIn, I said, come and join us. But the truth is, yeah, anytime that anybody says that, they're talking about the Q&A. Now that is still here in this event. You can do the Q&A, but bringing people in live, that's a whole nother idea and another ability to actually tell a story.
So what does it do? We drive the real interaction regardless of people's locations, right? We're blending both that broadcast space of quality and curation with the accessibility and the ability for anybody to join down that lower end. And, I want to connect something back as well, and we'll show this when we get to the demonstration. It's quick to set it up. It's easy. You're also getting those recorded ISOs for post-production. Worth noting, in a lot of those applications that were on the pyramid, we're talking about the importance to document. Peter, you started to talk about courts. We start to talk about that idea of chain of evidence of, the different, and part of the, Pearl product line, New South Wales and Australia, we have over 500 courtrooms, all powered by Pearl 2s. Why? Because they can interact with any of their existing technology, plug it in, and you can switch different layouts depending upon the type of trial that you're having in the space. Right. So that type of trial then all of a sudden changes. So how have you applied that? And maybe you can add a little bit of richness to that from the Microsoft perspective when you're talking to clients.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the beauty of especially that Pearl lineup too, is the configured, so I got to do a lot of training, right? So we do training sessions, we do a setup of a particular event or a courtroom or, a certain setup. We can save that and we can reuse that, right? It's repeatable. It's the same each and every time we call it up. And yeah, these devices, they can walk into any old infrastructure, right? And works, right? And that's usually what I'm faced with too, is right, we're dealing with a lot of legacy gear. And yeah, it's funny, you take somebody who's familiar with Teams rooms, right? We're fairly comfortable in that space, comfortable with Teams meeting rooms. And now we say it's a town hall or a live event and everyone gets scared, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you how many corporate communications that I speak to when we talk about a live event, how nervous that makes them feel, how this live aspect, and they don't want it to look rehearsed and, like a canned event. They want a bit of interactivity. And how do you do that and not make it so scary, right? That's tough.
Well, I think that intimidation's real. I mean, Jimmy, you probably have experienced that and see that with your clients as well. When we get outside of that kind of interactivity, we move to that idea of sharing or to storytelling. Oftentimes there is a little bit of a cognitive barrier for folks. All the more reason to remove technology, right? All the more reason to let your performers, your folks, focus on creating great content.
Yeah, we've made Teams so easy, not only in the personal side where you can join from your mobile device or your desktop. We've also made the conference room really easy. And the idea that in the conference room, I just walk in and I hit that single touch join. Peter, you and I speak to customers all the time where we know that that's one of the reasons why they adopt Teams rooms, to take away that fear of the technology and everything else. And now we've got the ability, like you said, to use these spaces. And remember, these spaces are some of the most expensive spaces that organizations spend money on. Not only on the technology side, but facilities and real estate is also becoming a huge investment for these companies. We want to make sure that we're able to get the most value out of those spaces. And again, this sort of makes it easier where you walk into the room, you hit the single touch join, and now you're into a broadcast event like we're in today.
Amen, man. That's great. And I'll say one other thing too. I just want to highlight. There's a secondary investment. And Peter, you appreciate this investment as well. There's a huge investment in a lot of enterprise organizations in massive broadcast studios. And they're fantastic, right? As long as everybody's at the studio and we want to do what the studio is capable of creating. And there's a framework. If that framework happens to be 10 years old, good luck bringing a Microsoft Teams participant in. What we see is a device like Nano. Microsoft Teams comes into it, and then we do HDMI out into your existing production board, whoever that might be, Ross, Grass Valley, Evertz, you name it. Now I've got a true hybrid production capability. I'm blending, again, to Jimmy's point, that expensive investment and technology to serve new video outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. 4 or 5 years ago, we were in green screen rooms, right? I know there's a few corporate green screen rooms, everybody would come in, but I have to say the last few years, this of having to have remote participants now in as well as to these production broadcast studios is really, wow, throwing a loop in. And yeah, thank goodness for Epiphan.
Well, let's get to the demo then. I think this is going to be an exciting opportunity. The last thing I'm going to remind folks is up in that corner is the Q&A button. You got to hit the question mark at the top right to get to it. Please throw in questions around here. Let's get into the details. You're technical experts. We're talking a lot about applications, experiences. You've got a unique challenge you want to face. Bring it to us, okay? But here's the fun part where an executive is going to do a live demo. Jimmy, you think about the places we've worked together in the past. What executive ever gets on a show and does a live demo, right? This is going to be the fun part. You guys feel free to heckle me. But what I'm going to go ahead and do here is real simple. I'm inside of Microsoft Teams. I'm going to share my screen, okay? And in doing so, you're going to see here that I'm inside of Epiphan Cloud. Okay, this is go.epiphan.cloud. This is our production service, and Dan Wallace has already set the 5-minute timer. He's playing for blood. He wants to make sure that I have to use up all my time. So the first thing I'm going to do is pause. 5 minutes is a long time. Let's orientate ourselves to what we've got going on for this event that I'm about to build using a physical device in my room, the Pearl Mini. And if you wonder if it's in the room, look on screen here and you'll see that the HDMI-B is a view out of my yard and beautiful Pacific Northwest day. It's really the power of our edge tools is the ability to real-time control a device anywhere in the world, okay? So if I go back over here, the first thing I'm gonna do, and it's one of 4 steps, is I'm going to apply the preset. So applying a preset is very simple. I come over into here, I choose my device, I select Apply Preset, and the power of the presets is that your organization can build these for those different types of events, QBRs, town halls, etc. In this case, I'm going to choose easy mode just because I want you to see it's real. We're going to come in here and I'm going to go ahead and push this up and apply this preset. Now, when I think about the device and the ability to connect in here, what I'm going to have is it's going to go ahead and push this down to the device and it's going to reboot that preset. So as the device comes online and starts to work through it, you'll see that this will become available. So here we are trying to apply the preset. The reason why it's pausing is because the Pearl Mini unplugged. And every good demo, when we went through the trial, we showed this ability that sometimes things go wrong. There's 2 things that plug into the back of the Pearl Mini. First, what we've got is a power cable, and the second is we have internet. And the internet is because we don't want to rely on wireless. What it allows me to do is connect in USB cameras like my Logitech Brio, HDMI cameras, SDI inputs, and you name it. All of these different kind of settings and devices can be set up ahead of time in that preset. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to connect in my HDMI source into the back of it, into HDMI A. And what you're going to see is a new view of my room that you haven't seen yet today. Now that I've got the physical hardware in the room and set up, and I've managed it all via the cloud, so I never physically had to be on site with the hardware, I'm going to start to add in my guests. In order to do that, I'm going to move over into this Connect tab, which I've opened over here. Connect is our ability to extract the Microsoft Teams and to push back into Microsoft Teams this video content. You'll see a number of different meetings running right now. For those of you that have dialed in, you're going to be in the green room. But here I am with my demo, so let me come in. I want to add my 2 remote guests to my physical studio I have here in person. So I'm going to add Mr. Jimmy Vaughan. You'll see that I've got my Pacific Northwest device. I want to put him in Microsoft Teams 1, full HD, and I hit start. I do the same for Peter. I bring him in, Pacific Northwest. You see I choose any of the other devices, Microsoft Teams 2, and I hit start. All right. Step 2 is complete. I've connected my sources to the device after creating the preset. Now what I'm going to do is simply come in here and verify that I've got my different folks in. Real easy way to do that is to come and click on the device, and I can look at the individual input channels. Here I am in my room. I've got Jimmy. I've got Peter. Step 3 for me is to always open the switcher. The switcher lets me know that all of my feeds are live and good, lets me know that I'm ready to go to YouTube in any second, Microsoft, wherever I want to go. Works with all the CDNs in the world. I'll start with my first screen, which is the show starting soon. I'll put a 3 up as the preview behind it and get ready for that. And now I notice that everything looks pretty good, except I don't have my screen share map. So let me go down here. What's unique about Connect is I can add screen share as an isolated channel. So no matter who's sharing, it's going to come across that channel. All right, I've added in the screen share. The switch looks good. I'm going to come back over here and we're going to go live. We're going to do the last step, which is come into YouTube and create and go live. So I'm going to go into my YouTube station. I'm going to hit go live. I see that it's popping up, warming up, getting ready. Each one of these, for those of you who haven't used YouTube before, it gives you a unique stream key and a common address. And that's already, again, been pre-configured in the presets. So if I come over here, I'll see that I have my easy mode teams and I can hit start stream. I also love to record the HDMI ISO in the room as well as my program feed. And now I've got all 3 of those things happening. So 4 steps, and now we're live. And so let's get to the show and let's go ahead and switch in. If I look over here and we get rolling, over in the YouTube world, I've got a secondary stream, show starting soon. Jimmy, Peter, you guys ready to start?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's make us YouTube famous, Nick.
Welcome to the show. I'm excited to join you, Nick Milani with Epiphan Video. I just set up a live demonstration in under 5 minutes, leveraging the power of Microsoft Teams, along with the Epiphan Pearl Mini here in my home studio. I'm joined by 2 guests here today that I'd love to share their story. So let me bring in my guests, Jimmy Vaughan, Peter Haas from Microsoft. Jimmy, what's your key takeaway in today's 30-second event?
My key takeaway in this was that was easy. It's easy to do, and it's really something that I think will benefit a lot of our customers.
Peter?
It's not scary, and I can have professional audio, professional video, and all on a touch screen. I'm amazing, just amazing.
Well, it is volunteer friendly. That's the beauty of it. No training required. Any idiot can do it, even an executive. Thanks for joining our 45-second demo here live on YouTube. Let's get back to our show. Well, there you have it, Dan. I don't know how I did in the background. I think I had it technically running before we went live, so I feel pretty proud about that. I think I made it under the 5-minute hurdle, even with unplugging my device on accident in the room, which never fails when you go to do these things. Thanks for sharing in that, Jimmy and Peter. That was fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and shut down this meeting over on the side because that's enough of us being out into an uncontrolled YouTube channel. And we'll let the pro, Dan Wallace, do what he does as we complete our show. As a reminder for the show, please click on that live link. Come join us, because what we want to do next is get into the interactive portion, have conversation with each of you, hear what you are facing day to day and how we can help kind of bridge this world between broadcast and video conferencing, leveraging the power of Microsoft Teams. All right, well, let's jump into the Q&A portion of it. The first one here is just a written question that I'll go ahead and pop in. Jimmy, this is probably great for you. It's a simple one. How does the system handle a video participant who does not match the desired video ratio, e.g. 16:9? So from your side, on the Microsoft side, anything over there?
Nothing that I can really think of. When we bring it into Teams, we're actually outputting into to standard formats and things like that. So when you come in, you're actually being changed into a format that I believe you guys on the Epiphan side know and understand, and we can bring that in and crop it and do things necessary. I think you see Dan is actually cropping some things while I'm here. I actually see this much screen, but Dan is actually cropping it so that he can see me directly. So.
Well, I think that's exactly it. So we're taking a full frame HD feed, extracting that at the server, by the way. And then what we're doing in our layouts here is creating different crops. So that way we can get a 3 up. And this goes back to what Peter was describing, the idea of kind of creating this more curated experience. Another simple question asked is the maximum resolution possible. So we can extract 1080p out of the server. The nice part is that's a higher resolution than Microsoft actually presents at its client. I think it's 720 at the client end. So we're able to get an increased kind of performance there. And Peter, tell me how you see the difference and kind of your experience with that.
To get the full high res, right away at the server and be able to manipulate and do whatever you want with that, it's what more can I say?
Gives you the control you need, right?
Yeah, and that's a big worry, right? Like that you don't have this high def, right? Yeah, my remote participants, I want them all, or I get one that is of a lower quality, right? And that's kind of what can happen at a Teams meeting as well, right? We get one that degrades down to a lower, okay, now we're affecting the whole thing. I think we have the ability here in this format to actually kind of deal with that, manage that, and Dan the magician on the back end makes it look really easy.
And by the way, it's worth noting for the folks out there that we have two people in the background producing today's event. Dan Wallace is handling what you're seeing here as far as the primary switches, the layouts, bringing in the media, which the media is all preloaded. So that way it's not coming in through screen share. You're getting that full kind of richness, full kind of quality when we play this. This is a nuance, by the way, you're going to add a lot of delight for your marketing departments when you introduce this. They build these really high quality files and then, screen share degrades it down to a 2 frame per second or 3 frame per second share. So this is a way to get kind of that high-end content back into the event as well. The only other person involved is we've got George Burchell, who's managing our green room. And again, click on that epiphan.com live or put that into your URL. Come join us and ask some questions. I'd love for you to try to stump us live on the air. While we're waiting for our first caller, let's do this. Another great question. It's asking, we need to do webinars with more than 100 attendees. Is that possible with Teams webinar? And I'd like to reframe that a little bit broader for both of you and just say this. There's a lot of confusion between live webinars and just the kind of common day-to-day interaction. How do you kind of help your customers understand that?
So that is probably one of the number one questions, I guess, when we're going into event is, what format am I using, right? Teams meeting, webinar, live event. What's the difference of all three? Where should I use that? So webinar, easily go over that 100 that question was asking there for. So, and why would I choose webinar over live event? So number one question I always ask is, where's your audience? Okay, if I have a large congregation of people in a corporate head office or so, we're not going to make friends with the network team, right? Everybody watching that feed, and it doesn't matter who the technology is here, right? Whether it's Microsoft or Zoom or YouTube or Zoom, right? WebEx, we all have this same limitation, right? We all have to think about a content delivery network, which you said earlier. Right? If we have a high concentration of employees, especially at a location, we've got to think about a content delivery network. So that's where Teams Live Event plays very well in that. We have our own eCDN. We also have a lot of partners in this space too that support us on the eCDN. So that's number one. Second question then is, what type of interactivity do we want? Right? Teams Live Event is a very moderated. We have moderated Q&A. We can control the questions that come in. And I can tell you, especially too, when I'm working in the healthcare space or the government space, where you've got a couple 100,000 audience members, you want to control that Q&A that's coming in. You want to moderate those questions. That's usually our medium for doing that. If we have a smaller group, we trust kind of the questions that will be asked. The webinar is a really great format for that. I can lock out the audio and video for my attendees, but I can unlock it if I want to bring more people in, right? So that's kind of where our major decision points are there.
Well, that's super helpful. I mean, I think there are a lot of considerations. One of the things, just for the team to understand, Epiphan will interact with any of the technologies, right? I mean, part of the beauty is we could be pushing this feed into a standard Teams meeting. Well, why would we do that? Well, I don't know, maybe we want to share a corporate story down or corporate and then have the local team talk about what that means, talk about and co-create, work together to brainstorm based on some kind of overarching goal of a session. So you might imagine real common, right? If we're physically together, we all get together in the major hall, we talk about the objective today, we break off into teams, we go work, and then we come back later in the day and we present as teams back to each other. All of that can be done inside of Teams. You can use an Epiphan, whether it's a virtual production tool or physical tool, to create kind of that curated video experience, push it into just a standard Teams experience. Now the teams are actually interacting around that kind of global content. Then you go to a little bit step up, right? That ability to bring people in remote, that ability to kind of make it more interactive, to do the webinar in a smaller group, have some of that richness, but then go to the full Monty where you have thousands of people. You need to rely on that kind of external CDN to really go big. In each of those cases, being able to kind of augment and create that curated experience is something that we're trying to make easy. And I think that's powerful. Speaking of making it easy, one of the questions asked in here was, how do we handle presentations when they're coming from the studio, but there's a remote guest? And I think this is part of where it's difficult for people to understand what's happening behind the scenes right now. It's always tricky to kind of share the screen of what's happening inside of the screen, right? Oftentimes Teams doesn't like to be shared of itself. But if I kind of share my screen and show people what's happening behind the scenes a little bit here, you're going to see we're running a Teams meeting. You're going to see Peter's in the meeting. We've got Dan Wallace, our producer. Give a wave, Dan. He's at his home in Ottawa, Canada, or outside of Ottawa, I should say, Ontario. Jimmy Vaughan's down in New Jersey. And then we've got this return feed coming in here, which we like to call showception, right? You're seeing a show within a show within a show, which is always Dan's favorite technique when I do this. But what I'm trying to demonstrate to people is I hit the share screen button up here in Microsoft Teams like anybody does. And that doesn't matter if you're in a studio and you can use it there on a local PC, or you're at somebody's home, or it's a guest that randomly shows up and says, Nick, I really want to show you my favorite install I recently did. So that just gives you a sense of how those presentations get used. If Jimmy Vaughan right now or Peter has shared content, it's going to come over to the same feed, which means Dan Wallace is then empowered to make the decision as to whether he wants to show it or not. So your person that's kind of in the background deciding what's viewed by your employees, they're making the ultimate call. They're the producer, so to speak, not to give it too big of a word. They're the ones that control that view.
And I'll say from Dan's point of view, like I appreciate, like I've been sitting on Dan's position. The switching is quick and fast, right? Unlike Teams where you're waiting 1, 2, 3, right? You're waiting about 3-4 seconds in a Teams live event to actually do a switch over. But here, in Epiphan, it's I want to cut to camera 2, I want to cut to camera 3. We're switching like that. So very powerful.
Well, that is powerful. And again, it's about accessibility and ubiquitous access to Teams participants, right? So speaking of that, I see somebody's joined us in our Teams meeting. Nobody else can see it because, again, we're isolated and bring those feeds. But welcome to the show, Burdett. Where are you joining us from? And happy Wednesday.
Thank you. I'm actually joining from Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, I love
East
it.
Coast.
Beautiful.
East Coast.
Yeah, there we go. Great.
Yeah, but
Great.
I spent 15 years working at Microsoft out in Redmond, so I've been away from that world for a while, but I know both coasts.
Wonderful. I love it. Well, Burdett, what brings you to today, and what question do you have for our panel of experts?
I'm no question per se. I'm just trying to get a feel for it. The technology is really looking nice, and I like the answer to the question earlier about the resolution. My challenge is I don't have audiences. I run an immersion lab. Think of it as a studio that's an operating room, and I reach out to smaller groups of physicians. And the 720p is just a restrictive factor right now.
Yeah. We see a lot of medical simulation. I don't know if that's too big of a word or if that fits in your space or if you're doing more user research and UX labs. But in both cases, one of the things that we see is the importance of not only creating the interactive, right, in real time, being able to talk to people and discuss like we're doing here, but also the ability to record those isolated views, to go back to the game day footage afterwards, right? To be able to have that documentation. And sometimes that's a requirement for different programs. And having that in high def certainly makes a big impact.
Yes.
Burdett, maybe you can tell everybody how easy it was to join, by the way. I mean, what's your setup and how did you come on board?
Yeah, so I'm actually sitting in my home studio right now, and it was as easy as putting in epiphan.com/live. I looked and it said join the meeting. I ended up with, I think it was George, actually, saying hello to me with someone else that was sitting in the room. And then George sent me the link in chat. I clicked on it, and then bingo, I'm here, I guess, in your waiting room first, and then you added me in.
Yeah, it's super easy. And as the host of the show, once I saw you on the Teams and I saw your name down there, I knew you're ready. Dan had you for the switch in the background, and we bring you in. And now that's all part of this production and going out. Is there any other questions or thoughts that you have for the team?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, and please, for the rest of you, don't hesitate to take the leap like Burdett did. Back to kind of the questions in the room. Let's take a look at what else other folks are asking about. One of the simple questions, by the way, just to be blunt, there was a question about whether Microsoft Teams live event is it end of life? There was a question as to how long is it going to be discontinued?
I don't think discontinued is the right word. I think enhanced is the right word. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see some of what we've learned in live event into new packages. And I'm not sure, Jimmy doesn't want to break NDA, so I'm not sure exactly what's public and what's not public yet. But I think you're going to see a big leap in the technology that's there right now from live event to what we're going to be doing in the future. And I think if you have to think about things, I believe that a lot of this will come out in the November timeframe at Microsoft Ignite when we have our Super Bowl event, which is Microsoft Ignite out in Redmond.
Well, I'm excited.
Peter, I don't know if you know what's out there live right now as far as the information and everything.
Yeah, and I know there's stuff in the works, everybody.
That's how I know
Ignite, great teaser for Ignite then, right? There you go. And one of the things last year with Ignite being here local in Seattle and having young children, I mean, it was amazing being able to kind of show up late to the event, listen to it on my headset as I was driving in, as I'm walking through the lobby, then pull the headset off and actually participate live and get to see people and interact. It's an incredible production. On the spectrum of simplicity versus complexity, I think it's more on the complex side. Yes. But it's a pretty wild event. So certainly looking forward to that. All right, let's take a look at another question that's back here. One of the questions is really simple. As far as how the grid or the layouts that we are using today, Epiphan has just in the background a pretty simple layout wizard. And Peter, maybe you can talk to a little bit about the idea of creating those layouts and how these can save presets. And they're asking about 2-ups, 4-ups, just kind of that process.
Yeah. So when I go into a company just to kind of show them what's possible, usually start with a simple PowerPoint slide. Everybody has a branded PowerPoint slide. Take that image, slap it in the background. It's pretty easy to upload into a Pearl, and then resize it and lay your video down. I would say too, if I were to start from scratch, boy, if I was, having a bad day, I would think I could still be under 30 minutes for a full show with branding that I've never seen before, with video layouts, and that's just one. And then the duplication, once I have a nice layout that I like, I can duplicate multiple times over and over to then do more and more layouts, right? Like it's a very easy, simple layout, right? And I know when I started too, looking around before I found Epiphan, using a lot of the freeware software that's out there, right? I remember too, it's like, oh God, that's not for me.
Well, that's an important nuance. I mean, Jimmy, you remember our test of Twitch back in the day, right? We ashamedly admit we did 4 shows. There was a group of us. It was pretty embarrassing. I think it's all been burned to the ground. But, somebody had to learn OBS. Yes. Mm-hmm. Somebody had to go learn a specific set of tools, and it's not an easy learning curve. And the problem is then once somebody knows how the mousetrap works, nobody else can touch the mousetrap. Yeah. I think one of the things you just described, Peter, and what we're fundamentally breaking is these tools are accessible for everybody. It's easy for anybody to go in and rationally understand what the hell's going on, create some of these layouts, but more importantly, the people that create the layouts, right? The marketing team, the team that's responsible for the visuals, once they create those presets, those become accessible to anybody in your organization. You can control who gets what access to which ones. In a case of a big brand company that might have multiple brands, you might have 12 different presets depending upon which shoe line you're representing that day. If you think about a company like Wolverine in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that has 12 sub shoe brands, those are prime examples where, depending upon what constituent you're talking to, you can quickly and easily change all of that and still be on brand and still achieve the brand requirements. Jimmy, you come in from a little bit more of the infrastructure side. Does that resonate with what you've seen? Is there anything to add?
It does really. I mean, the idea of presets and having those things there, and again, having it accessible. You might even have teams of people that put it together. Like you said, marketing may actually do all of the branding and make sure that these layouts are correct and everything else. And then you've got somebody behind the scenes who's a producer who's choosing that as the show goes on. So there's a whole bunch of things. When we talk about broadcast video, I know that I come from a broadcast video background. And all of these things used to be millions of dollars inside of large studio rooms and broadcast rooms and things like that. Now you've really got that professional size into a package that's local or to the cloud with you guys. And no matter where people sit, they can actually do things, and you can have this professional broadcast solution out to your brands. And whether it's 1 or the 12, like you talked about with the shoe brand, whether it's the 1 or the 12. It's easy to switch between them, and it's not confusing.
Yeah, it's only confusing if one of your guests leans off camera while somebody switches over to it. But that's my bad. Sorry, Dan. I was plugging in another HDMI on the side here. It is easy, and you're never going to make up for a bad guest, right? Doing something that doesn't help your show, but it does give us that ability to kind of like simply switch. And one of the things I love that you tie back to is that idea of the broadcast. And tell everybody, by the way, your experience with broadcast. Where did you start?
So yeah, I mean, I talk about it a little bit. It's many moons ago, but I actually was a TV producer. That's what I went to school for. That's what I actually did, winning awards, doing everything else. But I was at the World Wrestling Federation for about 6 or 7 years, late '90s, early 2000s, going through that whole era. So I know the pains of broadcast, even live events. I mean, Peter, Nick, and everybody else here. Live events are not done every single Monday without making mistakes and understanding things and fixing them and so on and so forth. So there was no better world to learn about how to do things than that situation that I was in.
Well, it's a fascinating story, because I think what you do bring is that perspective of a really high pressure, super high production, total chaos type environment. And frankly, I think what's happened is most people that haven't, explored creating video, creating shows like this, they have that fear in their mind. They think it's going to be like that. And I think one of the things one of your colleagues, Brody Langley, last year summarized after our Microsoft event is he shared the fact, he's like, the setup work, organizing the humans, getting the run of show, making sure everybody knows what they're going to say, that's going to be the same amount of work no matter what. We've got to organize and curate that experience, right? Whether we're physically on stage or virtual. He's like, but once it comes showtime, once it's actually lights on, how do we remove the stress of the technology? How do we remove the number of humans required to produce this? And how do we simplify that, giving organizations and individuals better access to video? So let's maybe just come back over to some more questions here and just kind of check in. Let's see here. So one question is the only way to do this with Epiphan Connect? Peter, I would love your horror stories of how we would achieve today's shows without Epiphan Connect. Please explain to the audience how we would do this and what kind of stress levels we'd be under.
Good gosh. Yeah. No, how would I do this, right? Like, yeah. Am I, learning OBS? Am I, pulling my hair out, with all a bunch of different equipment, or am I just going to have to spend the big money and get an AV company and to go and do it for me, right? Those were kind of, I guess, the choices I had before being introduced to Epiphan. And I have to say, just this whole remote attendee thing without Epiphan Connect, and mixing, matching in person with remote. Wow, it's I would have to daisy chain equipment and audio devices with mix minus going on to make sure that I didn't have feedback in the room. Like, right? I needed a team of people to make that work without Connect. So
There's two primary ways people do it. They do it pinup farm. So they set up a laptop for each person that joins,
yeah.
and then they use the HDMI out of the laptop into a professional board. They crop the views and they use that as their input. God forbid anything change in that Teams window. One person turns their video off, turns video on, shares screen. All hell breaks loose in the production, and people start slamming laptops like that classic commercial of sending the inappropriate email. The second way you could do it is using a local PC with NDI to feed Teams. You're going to get lower resolution. It's going to be really challenging on your local network. And again, you're relying on a PC. In this scenario right now, what we're producing, and we're about to bring another guest on, Hank, we're producing it in Microsoft Teams with total cloud production. So it's not touching any hardware. That gives us a reliability, a quality of outcome that is just so much greater than the traditional ways of doing it. But let's bring the guest to stage. Hank, thanks for joining us. Excited to have you here. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining from sunny California. I'm in Irvine right now.
Oh, good for you, man.
Right,
Send some of that sun up this way. We've lost our sun at this point.
Whatever I can do. But
So
I'm
Hank,
here.
what brings you to today?
Yeah, I'm here because I'm for the music side of things. I know Teams meeting, you have the high fidelity button you press if you want to do some intro music, some bed music. Live events does not offer that option. There's some workarounds, turn off auditorium mode, turn off noise compression. I was wondering how Epiphan helps if you want to have intro music to a meeting or even music at all. I know you use Teams meeting in order to, like in the background, to produce these. So maybe you don't run into that issue of not having the high fidelity mode, but is there an option there that makes it easier using this Epiphan, or is it the same? Just curious.
Yeah, there's a couple different options. So the simplest thing is you're talking about physical board. We got XLR on the back of this bad boy. So you can bring it in as a source, and that audio source and those different layouts and those different channels, you get to choose your audio. So when you're switching to it, we have control right now. Like one of the things we do as a nuance here, Hank, is we make sure that in this layout, all of our audio is enabled. So that way Peter and Jimmy can interrupt me and we can have a fluid conversation.
Mhm.
We can also, though, take in through XLR, all of our devices support XLR audio, bring it in that way. The other way we can do it, and the way that we did it in this show, is instead of just doing an audio pre-roll, we did a full video pre-roll. So if you remember, we showed that Microsoft Teams case study coming in. In that case, we're not screen sharing. What we're doing is actually uploading that media file into our instance of the production. In this case, it's a virtual one, unified, but it could be physically on the device too.
Mhm.
When I switch to that layout's going to play that media in full HD directly from it. So we're not worrying about any interaction with Teams. Teams is simply respecting us and what we're doing as the ultimate kind of audio and video input. And maybe Jimmy and Peter, you can help him understand a little bit more of how Teams, how that translation works between us and your platform.
Can I interrupt?
yeah.
So I don't have hardware. So I think
Cool.
the answer is I need to put an MP3 on the back end. I think is that in Unify? I need to upload
Yeah.
that and then just
Yep.
play that from there. Is that the workaround?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So there's a spot inside of the settings where you can go and upload files. You could upload an audio file. You can do pro audio. You can do an HD video in there. And then when you select that layout, and it could be part of multiples, right? It could just be an audio file that's playing. You're able to then create that experience. When you hit the switch, it's going to play that.
Okay. That helps.
Any other pro moves, Peter, you can think of?
So I was going to say, because it's an RTMP feed in, there's no Teams client there to interfere with noise block, right? So that's the one thing here. We've got noise block on, so you can't hear any construction around me or so on. But yeah, that Pearl or Connect is sending an RTMP feed into the Teams live event, so therefore not noise suppressed. Yeah.
It's one of the areas where if you look at when you're trying to bridge video conferencing tools or consumer tools, a lot of times it breaks down around screen share and audio. Audio and video, you want to get that higher res back in. It just wasn't intended for it, right?
Yeah.
And so as you see right now, I mean, Hank, you're behind the scenes. We're just in Microsoft Teams here. You know, if you want to pop open a screen share and show a diagram of what you're talking about, ultimately Dan Wallace decides whether it goes on air, but we have that ability to share screen that way. Although it breaks down so quickly when we think about the 3 frames per second. So then what we do is we think about in our run of show, how do we augment the show with rich media? And you saw 2 examples of that today. You saw Dan running kind of that video loop of the Perl family when we were talking about Perl, and you saw Microsoft Teams, the case study during the intro. Great way to kind of set up the show, so to speak. So that's some of the techniques we're using. Is there any other questions you have about it? Any other ideas you'd like to discuss?
You're on mute, Hank.
Oh, the classic mute.
That's my fault. That's my fault. I was like worried about my dog for a second. Here we go. That's the problem with live. But no, I'm actually in the background on Unify and Connect, just demoing myself. So that was one of the things that comes up in the meetings that I'm running. We always like to do a little bed music. So no, not at the moment. Thanks for those answers.
Well, thanks for joining, Hank. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you can start to use these techniques yourself. I'm telling you, this is really simple. And then one of the things we're trying to do is be really transparent, trying to demystify this stuff, trying to remove the claws of technology and that barrier it creates to people making great experiences. So as you explore that tool set, just know we're here as a team to support you. Happy to answer questions. And thanks for joining from California.
Hey, I can attest to that. Your team has been great with all of my emails, so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Hank. I appreciate your support. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
So that's another example of how simple it is to bring people on. Jimmy, have you ever seen anything like this? I mean, we've been doing this a long time, you and I. Like, this goes back.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool. And again, bringing in live guests on the video side, that's something that sort of is unique here. A lot of times when you do a Teams meeting, you'll know I can't control the feed. Somebody, shares their screen and then it just goes on, and then other things happen. And it's just the idea that we have the ability to actually control the feed out, not only to control whether they share the screen, whether they're on screen or off screen, but also even to bring in those guests. And that's something that's really, really unique. I said it early in the show. I posted on LinkedIn and I said, don't just join us for Q&A. Come on the show and we'll bring you in live so that you can actually ask these questions and talk to us, because there's nothing, I'm a guy from New York. I talk with my hands. There's nothing like talking. You can't get that inflection from a Q&A screen. You can't get that inflection from things. And that's why we want to do high quality and better video and actually use this video for the tool that it was intended for.
By the way, Jimmy, something just happened that I really want to focus on real quick for our audience. Absolutely correct. And if you notice, Peter laughed for a second there. He chuckled. It was a response of affirmation. It was a response of like, oh, I've been there, brother, right? We know what that sounds like. You lose that unless you're having the curated experience. And I'll give you an example. I joined a panel last year with a common kind of panel tool. I won't call them out, okay? But what it did was this. Whoever's talking gets this. They get a center screen like I've got. That's all you get. And what I noticed was during the panel, people were affirming what other people were saying. Maybe they're nodding, a nonverbal affirmation. Maybe they go, oh, good point. But the software was cutting that out because they were little thumbnails down below. So we lost that richness of the actual panel interaction where somebody's smiling and affirming and nodding or going, that doesn't make any damn sense. And that ability for us to create that today has a profound effect on the way people receive the message we're sharing with them, the way that they gather and kind of gain insights. So I love that you brought that up. Peter, you've probably seen this for a long time. I mean,
yeah, I mean, this panel type format is so often asked for, right? And it's exactly like you say, to be able to see everybody, see their reactions. As a producer on the back for technically switching that video back and forth, right? In a Teams live event, that is almost impossible to capture, right? This back and forth and really quick dialogue, it's almost impossible. I did an award show not too long ago and we just used live events, and by the time we switched to the person that received the award and all they said on screen was, thank you. We kind of missed those events, right? Or embarrassing, but we missed those, right? And that's why I like this format and the panel layouts. They're so great.
Well, I'll say one other thing real quick. I think there's also a pendulum that swung. We've decided that now we have to be back together for everything, and there's a reason, right? The technology's been a barrier for us doing true hybrid events. We're showing right now how you can do hybrid events, leveraging Microsoft Teams in any infrastructure you walk into. You show up to any event center or space in the world that's not already a Microsoft Teams enabled room, bring in a Pearl and you've got access to it. Now you've got that local studio, and now we can bridge that with all the richness of the Microsoft Teams infrastructure you've already invested in. And that's, I think, a superpower here. Let's get back to some written questions for folks. It says here are there plans to one day include 4K and 8K up converting? How about including clear comm capability for behind the scene local tech support? Wow, those are some pretty big feature requests. I know right now we're in the 1080p realm. I don't know if Microsoft has any 8K on their horizon. I know Epiphan supports 4K, but oftentimes the CDNs are the limiting factor here is where the content goes. So, Peter, Jimmy, what do you think about when you think about 4K and 8K?
I think that I'd have to pick the networking team up off the floor.
Yeah, I think people that are actually asking for that don't realize the impact of the ask that they're actually doing, because as we talk about network delivery, we are talking about bandwidth. And when we talk about bandwidth, companies pay for a certain amount of bandwidth. And if you get people back into the office, Peter, you've spoken about before, we have eCDN, which is content delivery enhancement solutions that we have. Why? Because if one person goes to YouTube, that's X amount of bandwidth. When 100 people go to YouTube, that's 100 times the bandwidth. What these content delivery networks really sort of look at is saying, all right, if 100 people are going there, let me share some of this information within the network so that not 100 people are going outside. And that's what these eCDNs are really doing. So when somebody says, oh, I want 4K here, they're not only asking for that one person. You've now got to elevate it for everybody inside of the organization. You've got to figure out how to do it. So to Peter's point, yeah, we're picking the network admins up off the floor when people make these kind of asks. We get the ask. They're asking for this. But even in the AV world, Nick, when somebody is sitting 15 feet away from a screen, they can't. A lay person cannot tell the difference between 1080p and 4K. So there are, I want to do this 4K only because somebody thinks that 4K is twice as good as 1080p, without investigating all of the things behind that ask.
The only thing I'll add back to this is that, oftentimes when we're thinking about 4K, we're thinking about post-event distribution on a lot of these localized distribution networks, right? AV over IP and a lot of the screens and a lot of the 4K displays. This is a perfect opportunity to record and be able to create those content afterwards as well. The maximum feed you're going to get out of Microsoft Teams will be 1080p, and that'll come from the server itself. From Azure, we actually extract there. It's how we can overcome the 720p restrictions of a physical connection. In fact, somebody asked the question about how that client would work, and that your local sources are establishing. But I just want to show something real quick. If I come back in, and I'm going to share screen here, and I'm going to go ahead and show exactly what's going on in the background. And so if I look at our actual production event today, right, we've got our green room, we've got our event. If I come in here, you're going to see that the three of us are each connected. What's fascinating is that we can come in and see the quality of the feeds. I'm getting a 1280, 30 frames per second. This is the fun part where we all see who has the best connection, the worst. Jimmy Vaughan coming hot. Full 1080p, 30 frames per second, looking great. Peter, let's see about you. Also coming in, just smoking hot, looking great, right? So in this case, my feed is technically the lowest. Makes sense. I'm on kind of I don't have the best internet here. And regardless, though, our system's going to transcode it up into that full HD signal. For those of you that actually produce events, by the way, for those of you that are in the background and thinking about those tech checks and thinking about the nervousness of what 10 canon string internet somebody's going to join on, we give you tools in the background to really see exactly what's going on, okay? All of this is with SRT. And the other one that was a question in the group was, what about the return feed? How are we seeing ourselves in here? And it goes back to that last question about comms. The beauty here is that we're extracting isolated audio. So Jimmy's audio is isolated from mine, from Peter's, right? And so what that's also letting me do is to push an isolated return feed. And it gives our producer, Dan Wallace, the ability in the background to talk to us in Teams if he needs to push us around or highlight something. It also gives him the ability to not be on air when we're doing those things. Back to that idea of controlling what audio gets heard depending upon where we're at in the segment. So this return feed right now is actually pushing back in to our production so that Jimmy, Peter, myself, Dan Wallace, our producer, and any guest that shows up on stage knows whether they're live on screen. And what Jimmy knows by looking at Microsoft Teams right now is that he just got added to the live production. And what Peter knows is that he's been sitting in that 2 up next to my screen share the whole time. So it makes the tool super approachable, but I do want to show you behind the scenes what's happening a little bit here, both in the practice session we did and in the real-time session we're creating today. In fact, if I go into Unify, you'll see that my isolated views are being recorded. Jimmy, Peter, we've got our guest views, we've got screen share. Heck, there's that music feed. We've got our program going out, streaming to multiple locations. All of this in a dashboard that I can see real-time anytime, anywhere in the world. And it gives you that ability to confidently come in and create these events. Jimmy, I think this is kind of the first time you've been exposed to a lot of this tooling. What do you think just from a visual aspect, from an approachability? I mean, somebody that's been in the space a long time, what do you think?
I think it's easy to use. I think it's put in a user-friendly kind of way. I think that anybody that took a couple of hours to learn this would have no problem doing a live event themselves. I think that the training and the upskilling to come into something like this is much less than what it used to be. I mean, think about sitting in front of a large switcher, even with just the audio. Remember, it used to be I had an audio person and I had a video person for the two sides. Now we're really sort of taking it and we're allowing somebody to do it and not having to learn OBS, not having to learn all of these different tools, but being presented with something very user-friendly and easy to use. Something, like I said, I think partners can find value inside of, all right, we're putting in a room system, but we're not only going to use this for the meetings, but we're also going to use this for live events and broadcasting now with a simple addition of something like this.
Yeah,
I appreciate that, Jimmy. It makes sense. Peter, how about you? What's your closing thoughts on today?
So, and I wanted to say here too, the Pearl, the power of that box, the ability to multi-stream. So I want a Teams live event. Now I have a content delivery network for my lobby, my digital signage all over my head office. Can I play this live event on all my digital signage? Well, guess what? Yeah, I have multiple feeds at the same time coming out of this Pearl, right? Like you can actually take broadcasting, Teams live events and further, right? Like it's really such a powerful tool when you get to learn it and just see how easy that is to keep layering on things and do things at the same time. It's purpose built, right? Unlike a Windows laptop running OBS, right? It's these boxes and Epiphan Connect, they're purpose built for broadcasting. And it's done in a very easy layouts. Like I continually am impressed with working with it.
Well, I really appreciate your perspective on that, Peter, and thank you for your support over the years. I think at the end of the day, the Pearl family of products gives you the confidence to interop and work with any technology that exists. You can walk into any space, whether that's a house of worship, a corporate environment, a university, a local live event center, or just an open field with a bunch of gear you rented. And you're going to get it pushed to a multiple stream locations. You'll get those ISOs recorded every single time for post-production. And oh, by the way, the Pearl Mini costs $3,700. This is really approachable technology your organizations can leverage to build better video outcomes. Thank you so much for joining today, guys. This was just an incredible discussion. I really appreciate your insights, and I love that we're defining the future of video beyond video conferencing, beyond broadcast, and that's broadcast without barriers here at Epiphan. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and have a great day.